Good to be with you all this morning. Thanks for having us. As you mentioned, I'm Josh Lassiter with First Tryon Advisors. Here's my colleague Rob Ketner is with me as well. We got a couple things we want to talk to you about today. The title of our presentation is More Than Debt: how CFOs can engage their financial advisors as strategic partners. And the topic we're going to cover is certainly more technical than the president's discussion here this morning, but it dovetails really nicely into a lot of the concepts that he was speaking to. And so we look forward to talking with you this morning. Feel free to ask questions throughout. We'll stop, and we obviously have a couple of polling questions as well. But again, thanks for having us this morning. Believe it or not, that picture on the right is me. And again, the picture on the left is Rob. As he mentioned, I came out of the master's program at North Carolina State, got my CPA, worked for Grant Thornton for several years right out of college. And then I went to an institution. I was at Elizabeth City State University in North Carolina, small HBCU in North Carolina, for 8 years. I served in 4 positions at Elizabeth City State. So I started as the contracts and grants accountant, became the assistant controller after about a year and a half, became the budget director after another year and a half, and then found myself at 29 years old as the CFO of a HBCU whose enrollment had dropped by 50%, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And fortunately, we put together a plan and orchestrated a turnaround that was extremely successful. Took enrollment from 1,300 back up to around 1,800 before I left. Enrollment at the institutions now around 2,200. So in the midst of kind of small institution enrollment declines, we were able to kind of fight a winning battle and put together a plan that we were all proud of and put the university on a sustainable path. Rob, you want to talk a little bit just about your background?
Sure. So can everybody hear me okay? I just turned this on 2 seconds ago. Great. So as John mentioned and as Josh just elaborated on, Josh has a great deal of expertise in various fields that he's been able to parlay into really helping our clients from his side of the fence now. I'm a finance lifer. I graduated college and did a corporate finance gig for about a year, and then went into investment banking for cities and counties for about 4 years, and have been here with First Tryon since 2015 now in the advisory space. So we've got outside perspective, and then somebody like me who's been in the industry for quite a while. And I think having that duality really helps us add value to our clients and just make sure we're comprehensive in our approach.
So really quickly, just so that the room knows kind of where we're headed for the next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to cover the agenda and tell you what we're going to try to cover. So we're going to assume that not everybody in the room knows what a financial advisor is or what a financial advisor does or why you should have one. So we're going to cover that first. The reason we're going to assume that is because when I was in the CFO chair at Elizabeth City State, I didn't know until someone told me. I went through my first bond surveillance call without an FA just because I didn't know any better. And so just making sure you know what the role of an FA is and why it's important, we're going to cover that to make sure kind of everyone's on the same page. After we do that, we're going to dive into 3 specific, I guess you could call them mini case studies where we've helped clients work through some pretty unique financing or transactional opportunities on their campus, and what made those opportunities unique, and kind of some lessons learned from each of those that'll help you better engage your financial advisor if you have one, or tell you a little bit more about how they can become a strategic partner for you. So let's dig in. First, we're going to start with a poll question. That's a pretty simple one. Does your college or university have a financial advisor? Yes, no, or I'm not sure. Again, if I was answering this question in 2014, I would have answered C. One more time, Alexa, or am I good? Okay, great. Just see what we've got coming in here. Okay. Okay. It's a pretty good mix here. So It's worthwhile to cover section 1 here. We've got at least half the folks who either don't have one or are not sure. So that's a good thing. So we'll jump right in here and just get into that a little bit. So I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but I'll give it, and then Rob and I can decide what, because I'm kind of throwing this in here unscripted. I think after being on both sides, what I would equate, do you have a financial advisor to? The question, if you say I don't need one, it would be like saying, well, I don't need to go to the dentist. I brush my teeth every day. Right. And so the reason I say that is because at the university, particularly if you're a small private, the process of issuing debt isn't something you do every day as a finance team. It's something that's going to come around at most once every couple years. And in the financial advisory space, it's our role to approach the market on your behalf and make sure you're getting the absolute best deal. As a CFO or finance professional, you're running a campus. You're making sure that you have enough cash in the bank to pay the bills. You're making sure payroll hits on time. You're managing a cafeteria. Perhaps you're managing dorms. Issuing debt is probably the last thing on your mind. And again, it happens once every couple years. So to expect you to be an expert in approaching that process is frankly unreasonable. And that's where your financial advisor comes in. So the role of a financial advisor is really to help you clarify your goals and objectives around capital project planning, to develop requests for proposals from banks or underwriters, and solicit feedback and competition on your behalf to drive down your borrowing rate. Excuse me. We also analyze the alternatives that come in and make sure you're aware of the pros and cons of what's being proposed. And we advise on a method of sale. And so all of that kind of, for our clients, falls on us, and we take it off of our CFOs and our AVPs and put the kind of shouldering work on ourselves for capital transactions. And that's kind of the typical role of an FA. We have a legal duty to act on your behalf and act as a fiduciary. So we are a regulated service provider. We are subject to audit and to make regulators come behind us often to make sure that everything we do is on your behalf, right? So that's different than an underwriter from Bank of America, PNC showing up your door and saying, hey, I can lend you the money, or we can be your underwriter and sell your bonds. They are not regulated, we are. So when we come to you, just know we, meaning the financial advisory industry, not First Tryon in particular, we are a regulated industry. And these duties are required of us as part of our licensure. I wish somebody would have shown me this slide in 2015. It makes all the sense in the world when you get on the other side of it, but when you're sitting there thinking I need to borrow money, all you think is I need to call a couple banks, I need to get a couple proposals. Depending on the size of the deal and the complexity of the deal, and whether you're borrowing from a bank or issuing public debt, a deal team is really complicated, and there are really only a couple people on your side of the table. So what this graphic shows is that it's really you, your financial advisor, and your bond counsel or your borrower's counsel, and everybody wants the deal to get done. But a lot of it's for different reasons, right? Underwriters are there to make money for themselves, to make sure that they can go sell the bonds to the public and make a profit while they do it. And so when you think about a deal, when you think about we need to go borrow $25 million to build a new dorm or a new student center, I think this is a really powerful picture as to what a deal looks like and kind of who is on your side of the table. There are indications here at the bottom of the screen, again, just referring to the fact that we are a regulated partner and have duties to act in your best interest. Does this make sense? Is this new to anybody, or anybody have any questions about this or these players? Because again, in 2015, this would have been a jewel for me.
The thing I'll jump in and say, Josh, is that a lot of times we're talking to folks who are unfamiliar with what an FA does. They hear FA and they're like, well, yeah, I've got somebody managing my money. They think financial advisor in the sense of
endowment,
investment management. And then when we try to say, oh, we're not that kind of financial advisor. Legally, we're called a municipal advisor. That confuses them more because they're saying, well, we're a college, we're a municipality. That's the regulatory term. So different kind of FA than you might be thinking of. I just wanted to add that.
So we got another polling question just to make sure everyone's still here and engaged. Your first call when you need to borrow money as a CFO or as a university. A, my financial advisor. B, a bank or underwriter. Or C, I'm not sure, we have not borrowed money recently. Sure. Yep. Great. So what this slide's kind of showing you here is how, since I came over in 2019 from the CFO chair, how we've tried to evolve our practice in the financial advisory services area. Typically, kind of the base level of service you should expect from a financial advisor starts in the middle of the slide here, where you have realized through meetings or plans or master plans that you need to borrow for a facility. And so you call your FA and say, hey, we need to borrow. And then over the next 3 to 6 months, they guide you towards a transaction that yields the amount of money necessary to build that building. What I've really pushed our team to do internally at First Tryon is to get integrated and involved earlier, right? Because there are so many instances where the CFOs could use an extra set of hands, an extra set of eyes, and a really sophisticated team in their planning processes. And so what we've tried to do is as necessary and as requested by the client, really jump in, because there are planning opportunities, there are approvals necessary from the board and other stakeholders that you really need to plan for. And if you are just calling your FA when you think you need to build a building, in our opinion, that's a little late in the game, because there are other borrowings to consider. There are other projects perhaps on the master plan that you're anticipating using cash on. And so anytime you get ready to borrow money, it's certainly happening in context. And we kind of pride ourselves on wanting to know what that context is and helping you and the leadership team think through that and think about that, as opposed to just deciding a transaction needs to happen 120 days from now. And so this slide just talks about that a little more. Again, kind of the baseline level of services that you should expect. High quality quantitative analysis. Hey, if I borrow money, what interest rate can I expect? What will my payments look like? What's the market looking like? When should we borrow? What would my credit rating be if we went to go get a rating from Moody's? Who are my kind of credit worthy peers? All of that type of analysis, advice, and support is kind of the traditional FA model. At a minimum, that's what you should expect. What we are seeing and what we're pushing for here internally at First Tryon is, again, integrating ourselves into your team to the extent that you want us there, and really helping you think, to the president's point in his talk, think 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead, right? Think beyond next year, and really have a plan of finance that weaves in all the key priorities that are on either your strategic plan or your master plan, or both. Does everyone feel like they know a little bit, the ones who answer no or I don't know, do you feel like you know a little bit more about what a financial advisor does? Because we're about to move out of that space and into some specific transactions, but did that little 101 help? Everybody good? Got a couple nods. So we're going to move into, again, just section 2, 3, and 4, talk about some specific but pretty unique transactions that we've helped a few universities with. So they are not plain vanilla financings. They are not, man, I needed to borrow $30 million to build this dorm and we did it. These are pretty unique, and they really showcase the value of having your financial advisor in on your plans, knowing what's going on with the university, knowing what your priorities are, because it creates opportunities that you might not have been made aware of if not for doing that.
Right, so this first section, as Josh said, these are all mini case studies, and this first one concentrates on macro plan finance that we put together for UNC Greensboro. about this time last year. And you see three different components up there at top. So they had three series of bonds that back when interest rates weren't what feels like through the roof like they are right now, were really ripe refinancing candidates. And we had our eyes on them, keeping staff abreast of potential savings, and finally got to the point where we said, hey guys, these numbers are quite compelling. Might we want to move forward with this? And this is typical of how we approach things and how most financial advisory shops do approach things. Is let's be mindful of staff time. Let's be mindful of resource allocation in the financing department, and let's bring a basket of opportunities to folks. Let's not pick away at opportunities here and there and go to market 3 different times when we make a single package and make more efficient use of resources and time. So we brought these opportunities to be able to bring for folks. And you'll see down there at the bottom a little white box that we'll talk about in a second. But just as a sneak preview, through the RFP process and through the feedback we got from bidders, we were able to drive additional value and get the project done for UCG that had been percolating for a while, but there were a few hurdles in the way of it getting done, namely just debt capacity. We're mindful of and we're able to real feedback from all those shops on the street, get them have their cake and eat it too. So another polling question here, really quickly before I dive into this. How the university manage debt RFPs in-house? So yes, no, we outsource to an FA or another third party, or C, we don't issue RFPs for debt.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I guess one thing to just point out while we're waiting for these results to kind of populate, we know, particularly for small private colleges, a lot of times the banks that you partner with are based on relationships, right? It's a community bank, or there's a board member who's well connected at a certain bank, and we get great interest rates because of that connection, and that's a real thing. And we certainly, as an FA, don't try to stand in the way of relationships that are benefiting the college. What we can do in those situations is make sure that you've got a really good pulse check on the market, that those rates that you're being quoted by the 2 or 3 banks that you always use are representative of what your credit would yield if we did go out wide, right? So, and we can do that formally or informally, but certainly have a lot of clients who have specific banking partners that they lean on and continue to lean on, even with us serving as the FA, and nothing that we do gets in the way of those relationships.
Yeah, that's right. We get engaged. Do you have a horse you want to choose now? And if they say yes, if it's a shop that we've seen do really good work, we're fully supportive of that. If it's a shop that met their needs in the past, we're fully supportive of that. So the idea is it's not coming up at the apple cart at all. And I see about a third of folks, do RFPs to their financial advisor or another third party, which is great. And then the remaining 2/3 either do not RFP or handle things in-house. So just for a general, for putting together RFPs, or when we're advising folks on how to put their own RFPs together, or maybe you're sitting in your chair thinking the next time you have a debt issuance, what should I be thinking about? What strategy should I put into the process? What should I be leaning on my FA to do? Just distill that down to 3 tips here. One is to cast a wide net. If you're going to RFP something, right? Don't go and ask 5 shops down the street unless you know that those 5 shops down the street are the only shops that can service your needs. Make sure you're surveying the scene because these folks have really good ideas. We harbor no illusions that we on our side of the fence have all the answers and know all the options and alternatives. You want to rely on folks to do work for you. And if you don't cast a wide net, you're only getting a narrow can offer you and your institution. 2 is just to recognize that they're sophisticated, and unless you already know the answer, don't actually give them the answer. Guide them, give them guardrails, but lean on their expertise. Draft broad questions that are going to get you good feedback, and leave room for folks to go off script a little bit, because as we'll talk about in a second, those off script moments in bids often are what derive a considerable amount of value. And then 3 is be concise. So we really try to make our RFPs 1-pagers, 2-pagers, because we're trying to be respectful of the time. They see a tremendous amount of these RFPs, and we want to make sure that they can give due attention to their response and not spinning their wheels sifting through the actual proposal.
Yeah, and before I click to the next slide, I'll just say that before I kind of saw the light as a young, immature CFO, I was the one who said, who can they call that I can't call, right? I can pick up the phone and call these 4 or 5 banks. So when we, this was just me being immature about the value that the FA was going to bring. So we'll show you the results of the Greensboro RFP. 17 responses, 52 unique proposals, right? So you talk about driving down your borrowing rate. That's going to do it better than a few calls to a few banks. And, this slide really just represents well kind of the value, but I'll let Rob talk to it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not just a borrowing cost. As you guys who have financial advisors who run our process know, you don't just flip to the back of the proposal and look at the interest rate or even look at the fee. You have to view everything in the context of the rest of the proposal and hey, are these covenants appropriate? What can we live with and not live with that's been put on? And weigh those against those really easy to digest quantitative benchmarks and just make sure you're viewing things holistically. So it's not only that passing the line that can get you a lower interest costs than in all likelihood it can, but it can get you better looks and it can get you folks who maybe understand your situation better and can offer a more accommodative financial covenant package or a more accommodative real estate collateral package or
yeah, I agree.
That's right. So I'm flip the page, Josh. We'll kind of pivot back to the UTG case study, and we were looking at 3 funding opportunities. So bond deals out there that carried above market interest rates and that based on what we were seeing looked like they could drive savings to the university would decide to refinance them. And I will not get way into the quantitative here and start talking jargony for very long, but when we're looking at just these pure, hey, I want to save money refinancing opportunities, we're not literally just answering that discrete question, can I save money? Because if I said, hey, I can save you 50 cents, you're ready to sign up. By the way, this is a public deal and it's going to take X number of hours of staff time and 60 to 90 days, you might say, well, that's just not worth it. So we try to contextualize opportunities for folks, and really that's the role of the financial advisor, is to not only help you get to market and your terms are fair and they bank that public market is giving you a good deal, but it's to say no. I always tell folks that I think we've done the best job as a fiduciary when we say, hold up, guys, right? This doesn't make sense. The interest cost is too high. Now is not the time to go to market. Let's wait for sunny skies. So that really hits on that third bullet, or saving $3 a year. That's not meaningful to you. if your opportunity costs, we run sensitivity analyses on every opportunity we clients, and if the math says that there's a lot of wisdom in not acting now, that's something that your FA will be telling you, and that's something that can really save a tremendous amount of staff time and energy. You don't want to get to the 2-yard line and have to stop, right? You want to know that your drive is dead way earlier in your march down the field, and that's what we try to help them do. There's also a whole separate subset of bond refinancings that have absolutely nothing to do with savings. And you may be looking to get out from under onerous financial covenants. You might have a 1.3 times debt service coverage ratio, and all your peer institutions that you talk to other CFO colleagues, they have a 1.25 times debt service coverage ratio. Well, you might want to get having a few tough years, lean years projected in the next couple, and maybe you want to restructure your debt service obligations to make navigating those choppy seas a little bit easier. You may have a put date or a tender date coming up, particularly if you're working with banks, where you've got to act, and if you don't act, you're either faced with paying a stepped up, way above market interest rate, or you've got to cut a check for the entire outstanding balance of your debt, which you don't want to do, so you're compelled to act, or debt capacity issues, and you may take a hybrid approach where you're refinancing some bonds and paying cash down for the other to create more borrowing capacity out long, right? There are lots of different reasons besides just purely saving money that you might want to tackle with debt that's already on your books. And as we're looking at these opportunities for folks and that subset of opportunities that are just, hey, I want to save money, they're we understand, and the biggie is obviously is what are the risks, right? And we'll talk in a second about UNCG's off-the-wall proposal they received and the various risks that came with that don't come with the standard bond financing. But we want to go in eyes wide open and make sure that we're not necessarily hacking a financing for folks with the 0.0001 worst case downside 100% probably not all the time, because you're going to miss opportunities doing that. But we do want to understand the spectrum of risks that folks are facing under option A, B, C, and D, right? And make sure that we're guiding them, just to have an earlier slide, in a way that's commensurate with their goals and objectives. And that segues into that second bubble on the bottom. That's the very first question we ask folks is, help us understand what this needs to look like at the end of the rainbow for you to say, man, we hit this out of the park. What is it? What does your board care about? What does the president care about? Optically, are we concerned about X, Y, or Z with students, with the public? How do we make sure that we're always cognizant of what this deal looks like above the rainbow? The third is, do we all get it? And that sounds really simple, but if the CFO or controller or AVP doesn't understand the bond financing, bank financing, that's a problem, and that's something that an FA is not going to support moving forward. Our duties are educational as well, duty of care, and if you don't understand the structure you're getting into, you all have to be getting that structure. We try to be very clear about that. And then lastly, for those of you who have a debt policy, that's always a helpful way to contextualize the options that are in front of you. So this pretty drawing right here is a new project with UNCG.
I don't think we did that. That's fake.
I'll keep talking about that picture here when we get the slides back. This project is called the Marketplace of K-8. And this is something that UNCG have been batting around for a while, but they didn't they didn't want to go out and borrow $10 million at that particular time. Nice to have, not necessarily got to have, and they were looking for the right opportunity to get it done. And what for the three bond financings above, we got a couple of really interesting proposals, and one of them was this upfront refinancing structure. So for those of you familiar with the way refinancing is framed, it's always net present value savings. So discount the difference between your old and new debt service back at a rate, and you want that number to be, anywhere between 3 and 5% of the amount of the bonds you are refinancing. That's just kind of an industry standard. The 2014 financing for UCG was about a $100 million bond deal, and shop came in and said, look, we will run the math and cut you a check for that net present value savings. If you realize that that's a fun number to talk about the concept, but you can't go grab net present value savings. You're realizing the savings at the time in discrete chunks year after year after year.
Yeah.
We're going to short circuit that. We're going to cut you a check.
Yeah, I think that's important. So when we were back on that slide where we had 17 firms respond and 52 unique proposals, all but this one were what you would see traditionally. Hey, here's what we'll refund the bonds at, here's what the savings will look like, and you as a university will accrue that savings over the life of the refunded bonds over 20 years or so. And then was it Morgan Stanley? Yeah, Morgan Stanley comes in with this really creative proposal that says, hey, all the savings that you would get over the next 20 years, we're going to discount those back to a number. And if you want that as a check today, we'll write you a check. And so that was a pretty unique proposal. And they weren't even aware of Tate and Gate, right? They weren't aware of the kind of chancellor's pet project priority that, just so happened it's an $11 million project, and the check that Morgan Stanley was going to cut was around $12 million. And so the stars started to align for us that, hey, this building that you'd really like to get done, but that you didn't really want to borrow for, man, we've got an opportunity here. And so I think that speaks back to having your team integrated into your plan and knowing what's going on and knowing what other projects are out there that your president might want to get done. Because what we saw is a very unique proposal that said, hey, we can actually bundle up all the savings from this refunding opportunity and cash fund this new project, so you don't have to issue any new debt for a $12 million Tate and Gate project. And that's ultimately what UNC Greensboro ended up doing.
Right, and you might be wondering, okay, it's too good to be true, and we scratch our heads too. Without getting way into the weeds, behind the scenes, what's happening is there Morgan Stanley or whichever firm offers the structure has an option issue refinancing bonds at a later date. So if rates are advantageous to them to do that, they issue those bonds. They don't take your check back or anything like that, but they issue the bonds and trade them away and make a few bucks. And that's standing, UNCG keeps its check, and everybody elegant solution. And again, as Josh said on, having a really close tie to the borrower here and knowing what was on their plates allowed and just really quickly at the top, there's other three financings. You can see that they all look a little bit different. Saved quite a bit of money, but okay, so the 2011 bonds, that was just a standard bank loan, and really nothing exotic about it whatsoever. The 2012 bond that outstanding, we did a Cinderella bond. So you may be aware that you cannot refund in advance, way in advance of their redemption date, tax-exempt bonds with other tax-exempt bonds. Call date. Cinderella bond, you taxable bonds that on that call date flip to tax-exempt. So you get to go ahead and lock in current interest rates while also maintaining that tax status once you get past the call date. So three different refinancing, and we talk about forward delivery, some options of the bigger finance. Three different solutions that allow UNC Greensboro to also fund a debt-free project. So really, we'll touch on it a little bit, but just highlights that casting that wide net and letting folks do work for you through the RFP process really can bear some pretty nice fruit for you. Takeaways here, I feel like an active value on that a couple times, bringing the fold early, keeping abreast of what's going on, that lets them help you better. Communicate with them regularly, same points, but walk your FA when you need to borrow money, take their meetings if they're in the neighborhood, call them and say, hey, I can bounce this idea off you. Those conversations usually end up resulting in valuable information transfer that can be parlayed later into these. As I said, let them do work for you.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the next one we want to jump into is in the next two topics are probably half the time of the UNCG topic. That was a pretty complicated one, but thought just showed a lot of kind of the dynamics of getting into the market and using your FA to help you. The next one we want to talk about was a P3 structure with Appalachian State University. So we're going to do another poll question before we get into that one, and then Rob's going to jump into that. And I need to go.
Talking about instead of you borrowing money yourself, developer-driven financing where you're outsourcing this, that, and the other to the development team or another set of third parties.
She said they're double checking something real quick.
And just keep that open once you move on.
Okay. So we got a lot of that I would say that this concept is more common for public universities, but it's still that the concept of using a P3, public-private partnership still comes into play where are you or do you need to use the services of a third party who has expertise in student housing development and that sort of thing to get your project either executed faster? Do you not want to be in the business of managing a dorm afterwards? And so a P3 structure can be as narrow as I'm just hiring a third party to build the building, or as wide as I'm hiring them to build the building and manage the facility after it opens.
Right. It's recognizing for private schools, it's recognizing that maybe could I build a dorm? Could I build a dining hall? Could I do X, Y, or Z? Sure. Do I do it every day? No. Are there other folks out there that I'll be able to lean on that can make this a little bit more of a smooth process for me? Maybe. So, yeah, about 60%, and I think we'll get into that a little bit here. This is a rendering, and this is essentially up and running now. But for those of you who've been to Appalachian State's campus or have watched football and seen their team play, really picturesque football stadium setting. And what they wanted to do was build a few new residence halls right adjacent to the football stadium, some new housing, some replacement housing, but they had an aging inventory. And we're trying to find a really efficient way to solve those problems, one on the capacity side and two just on the infrastructure age side.
I think the uniqueness about the story, and we won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but we had a plan of finance, we had a P3 partner lined up, we knew exactly what we were going to do to build. How many new beds?
Gosh, I think couple hundred. It was about a 1,500 bed project in total.
Yeah, 1,500 beds, and it was in 3 phases. And 2/3 of the way through a 1,500 bed project, COVID came, and that kind of affected the plan of finance and what borrowing rates look like, and what interest rates look like, and credit spreads. And so as the FA, we needed to pivot to be able to get the project finished. And so that's kind of, I'm kind of leading with the end in mind here, but that's what you'll see when we talk through this App State case study.
That's right. And this slide, I will not read through bullet by bullet at all, but again, just tying it back to what Josh mentioned on the front end of the presentation, we've got to know what our clients, and I say we as just the general FA community, not as First Tryon, but we've got to know what problems you're trying to solve and what a win looks like to you before we can give you good advice. So going back to the earlier section, keeping those communication channels open is integral. So app needed capacity. They needed to replace inventory. Boone is not flat land, right? So it's quite expensive to build up there on the mountain. And do they do it most of the time? Yeah, but can it be more painful than they'd like? Absolutely. And when you're dealing with a project this big, one thing that they recognize and that we helped advise them on is just that there might be better ways to do this than in-house, because there are literally firms out there who build schools on mountains, right? And build new dorms on mountains, and you can realize efficiencies by tapping into their expertise and also offload risk, also keep your administrative plates clean. It's not always the answer, and even most of the time it's not the answer, but there are special cases like this where turning over this leaf and just trying to vet the P3 approach makes a tremendous amount of sense. As Josh mentioned earlier, this is a 3-phase project, and the first 2 phases were traditional Moody's rated public bond deals, right? Nothing particularly exotic about them. Sold by an underwriting team and sort of set it and forget it, fixed rate money. They were both insured. So for those of you who have public debt or familiar with public debt, bond insurers can essentially stand in between the investors and the source of repayment, the borrower, and guarantee those payments for a cost. And what that does is drive down the interest rate. So it's just an algebra equation as to whether bond insurance makes sense. This is a very palatable structure to the bond insurers up until COVID hit. And as you might imagine, when COVID hit, everybody really started to price risk in higher education differently. We got to the end of the rainbow in phase 2, and we're gearing up for phase 3, starting to have the initial conversations about, hey, let's get the team back together. And we quickly got the feedback that the bond insurer, one, was not really all that interested in continuing to support student housing projects. 2, that the interest rate market in the public sphere had just gotten a little bit out of control, and that you can see those points here in the top box on this slide. And when I talk about credit spreads there in the third bullet, that's the premium that a student housing project pays in interest over the Commonwealth of Virginia, AAA, right? There's different ways that investors price risk. And all said, what this ended up meaning for Appalachian is that there was no path forward to completing the third phase of the project in the exact same way that the first 2 phases got done. So we're 2/3 of the way through, and we get this big wrench thrown into the project, and it could have died. Could have very easily died. What we're able to help App do is find a different way to get it done. We through just transactions, through RFPs, have relationships with a tremendous number of banks, as do any other financial advisory shops. And being able to harness those relationships is important, and know whose shoulder to tap on in a fire is incredibly important. We were able to leverage our relationships with various banks and leverage our knowledge base of what banks could do what to really quickly kind of short circuit the standard procurement process, which, because this was a private deal, a private P3 deal, we didn't have to RFP it. We could just go say, hey, we know you, bank, we know you have an appetite for this kind of paper. here's the structure, here's what we're thinking, might you be able to step in? And we were able to find a commercial bank to come in and flip the slide, Josh. Oh, sorry, go back one. I mean,
so we had PNC.
yeah, so you can see just the linkage to App State. There is a master lease in place on this third transaction, but really it structurally looks pretty similar in all other ways. And bringing this bank on board, no, it was not what we looked at on the front end of the financing and said, hey, this is where we're thinking this is going to land. But it allowed Appalachian to get a cost of funds for this third phase that was some 150 basis points better than if they had gone out in the public market and gotten it done. And the math all of a sudden penciled again, and they were able to proceed forward.
Yeah.
So takeaways page here. How do I get the most value out of my FA? One is to hire professionals that will put in the effort to learn your world, and that I think is incredibly important because they've got to know, hey, can I actually go through my foundation to knock out this project, or what approvals are standing in the way for me doing that, or hey, do we actually know the players? Can we solve a problem quickly by leveraging our experience and knowledge base? So if your FA isn't either plugged in or willing to put in the work to get plugged in, they're not fully servicing you. Then two is foster familiarity and loyalty. The bank that we plugged in, we had worked on a tremendous number of financings with, and knew that when they said out loud, hey, we can get this done, that they could actually get it done. And it really made the process a lot more efficient.
How are we on time?
30 minutes.
Okay, plenty of time. So the last section we wanted to cover was thinking about multi-year planning. That dovetails right into what the president was talking about, thinking beyond a year. Again, traditionally, financial advisory shops are doing a lot of what we've talked about over the first 30 minutes or so here, really coming into the fold when there is a transaction on the short horizon. What I've encouraged our team to do is to get more involved in multi-year planning, and we've done that pretty well. We're going to give you again just another case study that we've helped, again going back to UNC Greensboro, but got another polling question here before we jump into that.
And while you're answering, might just talk a little bit about how we sort of got to the point where at First Tryon we are on the sort of involved in the long range planning side of things. Josh mentioned it really accelerated when he came on board, but going back even a little bit further, this evolved out of us just doing a tremendous amount of modeling internally, just in connection with the normal bond financing, and saying, okay, well, if I borrow at this rate over this term, and we use this set of operating assumptions, right? What am I going to look like in 3, 4, 5 years? And am I going to trip over a covenant? Am I going to use up all my debt capacity? Am I going to have trouble paying my bills because I'm taking on this debt service? And we were already having to answer those questions, and that naturally evolved into sort of a siloed off modeling practice that's really evolved under Josh's leadership to where we are today, that he's going to talk about here in a second.
Yeah, and so, if you've attended any higher ed conferences, NACUBO in the last year or two, forecasting, planning, long range planning is kind of the topic of the day, right? And there are all these vendors out there who are willing to sell you a new piece of software to do that. And we don't, all of them come with certain levels of sophistication and bells and whistles. And we are operating in several of those environments. As a base, we build some really kind of high-end models in Excel that are really easy to use, really practical, produce nice outputs for our clients for their quarterly or monthly board meetings, and do exactly what Rob said. If we want to put in hypothetical projects with on-off switches on, hey, we're going to do this project in 2025, it's going to be debt funded, we're going to borrow, and we're going to assume this interest rate, you're able to see the impact on your P&L looking out 5 or 10 years. for projects that you turn on and off, which is great. And then you can layer in some operating assumptions. Is enrollment going to go up? Is enrollment going to go down? Are the cost of salary, faculty and staff salaries going to go up? By how much? And so we've been doing that for a while, and they serve really good, really specific purposes for our clients and helping keep stakeholders and the board educated. What we're going to jump into here is that UNC Greensboro, along with now, I guess it's 9 schools in the UNC system, have latched onto a product you may have heard of called Anaplan. Anaplan is a new kind of higher ed planning platform that's been in use in the public and private sector for a decade or so, and is just making their way into higher ed. And UNC Asheville was the first school that came to me and said, hey, we want to implement Anaplan. I've kicked the tires on all the other planning platforms. The CFO there, John Pierce, is a good friend. He said, I've looked at Scenario, I've looked at Axiom by Kaufman Hall, I've looked at kind of all the options out there, and I want to implement Anaplan. Josh, will you come on board and lead the project for me? Because I've got a university to lead. I've got, everything that I'm up to my elbows in just managing us through this pandemic, HERF funds, all the things that you all are familiar with. But we need this long range forecasting. So can you come on board and lead the project so that I can kind of dip in and out of the project when I want to, but know that it's going to stay on track. And so we did that at Asheville, and we did it successfully. And then 8 or 9 other UNC schools followed. And so at UNC Greensboro, this is generally kind of what their plan for long range planning looks like, and the questions or the use cases that they're trying to answer in this new environment, this new software called Anaplan. And they've the teal section there on the left is the use cases we've already attacked and built models for. I think what's kind of interesting here is we're really digging in at UNCG on current year and multi-year forecasting, looking at different enrollment cohorts and enrollment types. So I'll get into this a little bit, but I don't know that it's particularly helpful to build a model that says enrollment's going to go up by 2%, because there are so many bits and pieces to enrollment, right? When we say enrollment goes up by 2%, what are we implying about the number of freshmen? What are we implying about the number of transfers? What are we implying about our retention rate? How many grads are in that number? How many students are going to graduate as part of that number? How many grad students are in that number? And then each of those student type verticals stays in our environment at a different rate, right? The likelihood that a freshman is going to be here next year is way different than the likelihood that a transfer is going to be here next year once they come, right? And so does your model take that into account, or do you just broad brush it and say enrollment's going to be down by 2%? Because those are 2 totally different things. On top of that, in North Carolina, we get state appropriation at a differential level based on the type of courses that the students are taking. So they actually get different appropriation for teaching biology courses than they do math courses, than they do history courses. And they actually compare the total student credit hours delivered in one year compared to the total student credit hours delivered in another year to derive the state appropriation. So when you're thinking about what's a budget going to look like 2, 3, 4 years from now, what does our enrollment mix look like, right? Because the money we're going to get from the state is going to be significantly different depending on what our enrollment mix looks like. And so that's where that 12 cell funding kind of honeycomb there comes into play. So what we did here in probably the last 6 to 7 months with UNC Greensboro, we built 2 models, a current year model and a multi-year model. The current year model answers the question, where are we likely to end this fiscal year on June 30th if I want to pivot across all my different fund types, restricted, unrestricted, and down the account structure, where are we going to end this fiscal year? And it can be sliced and diced by as much as your chart of accounts will allow. And then a multi-year model that answers the question, what will we look like in the next 5+ years? The current year model, again, projects at the highest level, at the UNCG level, but also at the most detailed level. So I can answer, where are we going to land in the general fund? But I can also answer, what is the parking trust fund supplies account going to look like at the end of the year, based on 3-year average, based on pace of spending. All that logic is built in the model to help us estimate where we're going to land at the end of the current year and answer that question better than we otherwise would have been able to. The multi-year model, again, I talked about this a little bit, but enrollment by key student groups. So my undergraduates behaving different, or my new freshmen behaving different than my transfers, behaving different than my master's students. And then we also get to play with on a multiple scenario basis, housing configurations. Are the dorms going to be full? Are they going to be 90% full, 95% full? Are we going to, in Baines Hall, are we going to switch all the singles to doubles? What does that do to revenue? What we did was really build a model that drove to 90% of the revenue that's at your institution, which is going to be tuition, housing, and dining, and let us play with those levers, right? In real time, be able to go manipulate tuition, housing, and dining by scenario in an online platform that you log into, and it updates dynamically, right? So there's not the benefit to Anaplan over kind of an Excel model, at least from my experience, is that you're not passing around versions. You don't have version control. Is the latest version out there on the shared drive? What does scenario 2 look like versus scenario 4? All of it lives in the same environment. And then one thing we've done really neat also at Greensboro is workforce planning by position. So we actually go into, I don't know how many Banner schools are here, but UNCG is Banner. We should have asked that as a poll question. We actually go into their MBA jobs and their position control data, pull in all the positions in the Anaplan, and then dynamically in their multi-year forecast, we're able to say in our scenario 2, scenario 3, whichever scenario you want, are these positions going to stay vacant or are we going to fill them? And so then what does that do to our faculty and staff wages based on leaving those positions vacant or not by scenario? So at the end of the day, we implemented, again, a current year planning and multi-year forecasting tool. Our role, again, kind of an expanded role for an FA, but we were project manager for the project. We minimized the daily involvement needed by the CFO and the AVC. We ensure that the model met their requirements and specifications, what they wanted to see out of it. And we were flexible enough to adapt to scope changes. So that funding model in North Carolina that I mentioned to you, one really fun thing was that in the middle of the project, while we were building the model, the UNC Board of Governors decided to change the funding model that had been in place for 20 years. So, go figure, right? But all the logic that we had planned to build in for the 12 cell state funding became a funding that was even more granular because it was by zip code. It was, again, individual funding levels for different zip codes, different majors. But we were able to incorporate that. We were able, because we were aware of what's going on, knowing what's happening to how our clients are funded, how they'll be funded in the future, we were attuned to that and were able to accommodate that scope change in the project without much wasted effort. So again, takeaways from this section: how do I get maximum value out of my financial advisor to the extent that I have one? Partner with professionals that understand the demands of your role as a university CFO. Obviously, I came from that chair. I spent 5 years in the chair. We've got another colleague, Greg Lovins, who was CFO at Appalachian State for about a decade, and then CFO at Lander in South Carolina, a private in South Carolina, for a couple of years. So in addition to kind of career FAs, we also have former CFOs on staff that can really help bring some color to what's going on and the pressures that you all face each and every day. Expect your partners to be able to offer holistic advice and support just beyond the transaction. We want, at First Tryon, we want to be as involved as you want us to be, and are happy to help at kind of any stage of the planning process that makes sense for you. And then ensure your advisors are taking work off your plate, not adding to it. If you got a project you want to do, we ought to be able to help you with it. And another thing too, we pride ourselves in being able to say yes when we can help and no when we can't. So we've had several CFOs call us for things since I've come over, and a couple times where we've had to say, hey, no, there's a better partner out there. Let us help you find them. And so we're really sensitive to making sure you get good help for whatever the project is or priority you have in front of you.
And it dovetails with number 2, but just in talking about long-range planning and how your FA may or may not be involved in that, even if your FA is not the one steering the ship and building the models, it's incredibly valuable to us in the FA chair when we're plugged into what you're doing on that front. Because if we're not assisting you, or your FA is not assisting you in that planning process directly, what goes on in the planning process is going to impact what they're doing for you on the debt side. They're going to be able to give you better advice as to how to stage projects. Hey, when do I pull the trigger on this bond financing? Might I want to wait a couple of years based on these projections we're showing? Having that viewpoint in our chair is tremendously helpful, and just helps us, going back to an earlier slide, just help know what a win looks like to you really, really well. So we'll just encourage folks, even if you're not leaning on your FA to build you a model or to help you assess operational assumptions, plug them in, let them know what you're doing so they can help you out better on the debt front.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add, because we're getting ready to I think we'll finish a little early, but want to leave time for questions. Having a kind of a plan for what questions you're going to try to answer institutionally is a big deal, because the hardest model to build is the first one, right? Because you got white space and no data, and you need to answer some questions. But once you get here, once you've done these things, 90% of the data that you need to answer the questions about program profitability, you've already gathered when you built those first couple models. I need the cost by organization code or department code, right? I need faculty salaries. Well, good, we pulled those into the multi-year model, and they're already in the planning environment. So the hardest hump to get over is the first one, which is we got to build something and answer a couple critical questions. Because when you do that, your data sets are starting to come into your model. You're starting to build the infrastructure and planning to pull positions out of position control, pull operating ledger data over. I don't want to oversimplify it, but almost every use case beyond that gets incrementally easier, because you're just adding the data relative to that specific question. You've got a whole lot of data that's already in your environment that's available to you to integrate. I hope that makes sense, but again, the probably the most difficult phase is the first one, because you're starting with a blank canvas. So I think that wraps us up. Any questions for Rob or myself?
Josh, we'll go to the next slide.
Go to the next slide, Rob says.
Oh, I did not realize those were our faces. I thought we had. You can stay away from our faces if y'all seen enough of us.
Yeah, just talk a little bit. I mean, this is just, again, we're based in North Carolina, South Carolina, expanding up into in Virginia and Georgia, but mostly based in the Southeast. We picked up a few clients here in Virginia recently, but Southeast-based firm here, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I work out of a small town called Hertford, North Carolina, which is near the coast in North Carolina, but again, a fairly local shop from an FA perspective that would be easily accessible to you all. But just a little bit about our footprint in the colleges and universities that we have worked with over the last 10, 15 years.
Does anybody have any questions, either about any of the material we've covered, about in particular what FAs do and don't do? Well, I think that's all we've got to cover, Josh, unless you have anything to add, but we just sure appreciate the time, and thanks to the Brown Edwards folks for having us. This has been great, and look forward to seeing folks around here today. So thank you.